Welcome to Platinum Life University, your life in full expression. I am your host, Beth Wolf. Welcome back to another chapter by Neville Goddard from the book, The Law and the Promise. Again, he was an amazing speaker in the early 20th century, and this book alone opened me up to what is called imagining creates reality. Neville introduces to us states of consciousness, states of being, states of awareness. And if you have ever in your life allowed yourself to sit and visualize and feel a new state of beingness for yourself, this is what Neville introduces us to more and more. One of his famous books that I read for the very first time is called Feeling is the Secret. And if we can allow ourselves to embody a feeling in an imaginal way, we become an electromagnetic drawing force. Things begin to come into our awareness of inspired actions that we can take. So let's dive into chapter 3. This is all about, the title is called Turn the Wheel Backward. If you have ever heard of the art of revision, this is exactly what Neville introduces to us in this chapter. So how can this benefit you and I? Well, I'm going to share one of my own stories of how I revised my own ankle sprain. That was painful. And he's got a lot of stories in this chapter about what the art of revision is. I love how he begins to introduce this book, because he has a statement in here that says, the perfectly stable or static state is always unattainable. And I was like, Neville, what are you saying there? And it came to my mind about the word balance. How often have we heard about, oh, I really want to be experiencing work and life balance? And a visual comes to my mind with that is that if we have all these plates in the air and we're balancing them, and maybe you've seen this before where people are spinning plates and balancing them, that takes a lot of concentration and a lot of effort. And Neville is saying that if we are set in having this perfectly stable and static state, well, guess what? It's always unattainable. But there's a great side to this, in that he is using the art of revision and this imaginal activity to really create some amazing benefits with us and for us. One of them is imagine better than the best you know. So what could you actually imagine better than the best that you know of right now? And then another one is that discover the power within you that can consciously create circumstances. I don't know about you, but that sounds not only cool, fun, and amazing. He also introduces to us in this chapter about learn to mentally falsify facts. And I was like, wait a minute, Neville, my mama told me never to lie. But this is a whole different use of our imaginal activity. And so what he introduces to us in this chapter is we get to learn to move from a passive reaction in life to an active creation, which goes back to how can we use this mental faculty of imagination that was so alive probably when we were younger. And as we spent more and more time around our environment, that if our imagination was not really fostered and allowed to express itself in healthy ways and expansive ways, the good for you and the good for others, that a lot of times it's squashed. So the benefit of mentally falsifying facts and moving from a passive reaction to an active creation, this is going to help us break the wheel of reoccurrence. Have you ever experienced the same thing over and over again and you really don't care for it? This can help us break that. And then it can also help you and I build a cumulative enlarging future. Momentum would be another word for it. So we're going to learn about how to revise our day as we go to sleep at night, but even during the day. What is it like for us to revise the undesirable parts of our day? Basically, I akin this to that we're just cleaning up our energy. We're cleaning up the inside of our thoughts and the inside of our body energy and just cleaning it up, just like we would do normal hygiene for the outside of our body each and every day. So are you ready, guys, to take off? Let's learn a little bit about Turn the Wheel Backward by Neville Goddard from the book, The Law and the Promise. He starts with a quote from H.G. Wells, which was an English writer from 1866 to 1946. And he wrote many genres. He was considered really the father of science fiction. He wrote several books, The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, The War of the Worlds, and The First Man in the Moon. He also wrote The Shape of Things to Come back in 1933. So here's the quote by H.G. Wells. "Oh, let your strong imagination churn the great wheel backward until Troy unburn. All life is, throughout the ages, nothing but the continuing solution of a continuous synthetic problem." I'm going to read that one again. All life is, throughout the ages, nothing but the continuing solution of a continuous synthetic problem. Neville writes, "The perfectly stable or static state is always unattainable. The end attained objectively always realizes more than the end of the individual originally had in view. This in turn creates a new situation of inner conflict, needing novel solutions to force man along the path of creative solutions. His touch is infinite and lends a yonder to all ends. Today's events are bound to disturb yesterday's established order. The creatively active imagination invariably unsettles a pre-existing peace of mind." In other words, things are disrupted so that it invites us to actually tap in to our creative imaginal activities and draw solutions to us. Reading on, the question may arise as to how, by representing others to ourselves as better than they really were, or mentally rewriting a letter to make it conform to our wish, or by revising the scene of an accident, the interview with the employer, or so on, could change what seems to be the unalterable facts of the past. But remember my claims for imagining. Imagining creates reality. What it makes, it can unmake. It is not only conservative, building a life from images supplied by memory. It is also creatively transformative, altering a theme already in being. Let's pull that apart a little bit and pause here. He says that it is not only conservative, meaning imagination can be conservative. And it's conservative when you and I choose to build a life from images that are supplied from our own memory. So as we supply each and every day from the past memories, we're actually using our imagination in a conservative way. The flip side of that coin, or at the other end of a spectrum, he says that if we use our imaginal creative activity from a transformative perspective, then we begin to alter a theme. We're not creating from the past memories. We're actually open to new and fresh ideas. So going on reading here, the parable of the unjust steward gives the answer to this question. We can alter our world by means of a certain illegal imaginal practice, by means of a mental falsification of the facts. That is, by means of a certain intentional imaginal alteration of that which we have experienced. All of this is done in one's imagination. This is a form of falsehood which not only is not condemned, but it is actually approved in the gospel teaching. By means of such falsehood, a man destroys the causes of evil and acquires friends on the strength of this revision proves, judging by the high praise the unjust steward received from his master, that he is deserving of confidence. So here we're going to look at feel the way you would expect to feel as if your wish was already fulfilled. Because imagining creates reality, we can carry revision to the extreme and revise a scene that would be otherwise unforgivable. We learn to distinguish between man, who is all imagination, and those states into which he may enter. An unjust steward looking at another's distress will represent the other to himself as he ought to be seen. Were he himself in need, he would enter his dream in his imagination and imagine what he would see and how things would seem and how people would act after these things should be. Then, in this state, he would fall asleep, feeling the way he would expect to feel under such circumstances. This is such a great example as he's beginning to unveil to us the power of our imagination, that we use our imagination to create a state of awareness, a state of being, as if your wish is already fulfilled. And then from the book, The Feeling of the Secret, Neville talks about that one of the best times to do this imaginal activity is right before you go to sleep. So you go into your sleep, letting your conscious mind go to rest and your subconscious mind goes to work on this state of beingness. Going on, would that all the Lord's people were unjust stewards, mentally falsifying the facts of life to deliver individuals forevermore. For the imaginal change goes forward until at the length the altered pattern is realized on the heights of attainment. Our future is our imaginal activity in its creative march. Imagine better than the best you know. Yes, imagine better than the best you know. To revise the past is to reconstruct it with new content. Man should daily relive the day as he wished he had lived it, revising the scenes to make them conform to his ideals. For instance, suppose today's mail brought disappointing news. Revise the letter. Mentally rewrite and make it conform to the news you wish you had received. Then, in imagination, read the revised letter over and over again, and this will arouse the feeling of naturalness. And imaginal acts become facts as soon as we feel natural in that act. This is the essence of revision, and revision results in repeal. Now, in this day, we may not receive actually a letter in the mail, but we might receive an email or a text message or something like that over social media that has been to us. And this is where you can begin to use your superpower of imagination and create the revision first in your imagination, and the repeal begins. Now, again, let's just keep reading. If this is new to you, this art of revision, and you're just like, but Beth, you're not even living in reality. This is a skill and a tool set that you can use to change your state of awareness, your state of beingness, your state of attraction. So let's go on here. Well, this is exactly what happened with this particular man that Neville calls F.B. And this is about selling a piece of land. So here we go with this story. Late in July, I wrote to a real estate agent my desire to sell a piece of land, which had been a financial burden to me. His negative reply listed all the reasons why sales were at a standstill in that area, and he forecast a bleak period of waiting until the first of the year. I received this letter on a Tuesday, and in my imagination, I rewrote with words indicating that the agent was eager to take my listing. I read this revised letter over and over. I extended my imaginal drama using your theme of the four mighty ones of our imagination. And from the book, this is another one of Neville's books called The Seed Time and the Harvest. And the four mighty ones are this, you guys: the producer, the author, the director, and the actor. Those are our four mighty ones that this story is going to show us how this particular Mr. F.B. used this. Now, in our day and age, in 2021, it's almost the flip side. I mean, you could sell anything right now. Land and houses where I live right now are going like crazy. So maybe we would flip this on the other side where you were like, there's so many offers coming in on a house that I would love to live in that, I'm going to be lucky if I ever give it. They're giving cash offers, and you could just state all of these circumstances and conditions that are going on in the state of fact, the level of fact. And Neville is introducing to us that we can use the four mighty ones: producer, author, director, and actor, that can begin to change things from us from within, and we begin to experience results differently on the outside. So let's go back to the book and read a little bit about this man's experience in his land. So he says, in my imaginal scene as producer, I suggested the theme. The lot is sold for a profit. As the author, I wrote this simple scene, which to me implied fulfillment. Standing in the real estate office, I extended my hand to the agent and said, "Thank you, sir." And he replied, "It was a pleasure doing business with you." As director, I rehearsed myself as actor until that scene was vividly real, and I felt, that's the key point, this man felt the relief which would be his if the burden were really lifted. And remember, the burden is of selling this land in maybe not so great of a place. And he has now created, he is the producer, he is the director, and he is the author and actor of this. Well, here we go. Here's some results from what he did in the art of revision. 3 days later, the agent and I had originally phoned me saying he had a deposit for my lot at the price I had specified. I signed the papers in the office the next day, extended my hand and said, "Thank you, sir." And the agent replied, "It was a pleasure doing business with you." Now recall what I just read. That is exactly what this man had imagined would happen. He wrote that script, and 3 days later, he experienced it. 5 days after I had constructed and enacted an imaginal scene, it became a physical reality and was played word for word just as I had heard it in my imagination. The feeling of relief and joy came, not so much selling the property, but from the incontrovertible proof that my imagined drama worked. Isn't that cool? It worked. If the thing accomplished were all, how futile, but F.B. discovered a power within himself that can consciously create circumstances. You and I can consciously create the circumstances that we would love, the conditions that we would love. So Are we using our superpower of imagination to create from the past and the memories? Or are we using it to be creative? Going back to this chapter, Neville continues to write, by mentally falsifying the facts of life, man moves from passive reaction to active reaction. This breaks the wheel of recurrence and builds a cumulatively enlarging future. What enlarging future would you love to experience? If a man does not always create in the full sense of the word, it is because he is not faithful to his vision, or else he thinks of what he wants rather than from the wish fulfilled. There's a great distinction from there. If we are thinking in want, that is actually an energy of lack. It's sending out a signal that I don't already have it. So Neville's introducing to us that we want to be thinking from the wish fulfilled. We want to be thinking from and feeling from as if it is already happened. And remember, back in this story, he had a feeling of relief that this property had been sold. So whatever condition, circumstance, or situation that you would love to experience, it's not just about checking off the task or writing down, this is done, this is complete, but asking yourself, how would you feel as if it was already complete and done? So going back to the reading, Neville writes that man is such an extraordinary synthesis, partly tied by his senses and partly free to dream that is internal conflicts and perineal. The state of conflict in the individual is expressed in society. So let me just pause a minute and just pull out here that he says that you and I are an extraordinary synthesis. We're partly tied to our senses, seeing, touching, feeling, hearing. And that's what gives us feedback that is going on at the level of fact in our lives. So we have that at the level of fact. This is what's going on in my life right now, Beth. But then he says that we also are partly free to dream that our internal conflicts are perennial. They're seasonal. They come and go. Yeah. Neville says that life is a romantic adventure. To live creatively, imagining novel solutions to ever more complex problems is far nobler than to restrain or kill out desire. All that is desired can be imagined into existence. Here we go into revise your day is really going to begin to clean up your energy and change your frequency within yourself and change your vibration. Neville says, wouldst thou be in a dream and yet not sleep? Try to revise your day every night before falling asleep. Try to visualize clearly and enter into the revised scene, which would be the imaginal solution of your problem. The revised imaginal structure may have a great influence on others, but that is not your concern. The other influenced in the following story is profoundly grateful for that influence. So here he's going to tell us another story, and this is just wonderful. Last August, while on a blind date, I met the man I wanted to marry. This happens sometimes, and it happened to me. He was everything I had ever thought of a desirable in a husband. 2 days after this enchanted evening, it was necessary for me to change my place of residence because of my work. And that same week, the mutual friend who had introduced me to this man moved away from the city. I realized that the man I had met probably did not know my new address. And frankly, I was not sure he knew my name. All right, the story continues. After your last lecture, I spoke to you of this situation. Although I had plenty of other dates, I could not forget this one man. Your lecture was based on revising your day, and after speaking to you, I determined to revise my day every day. Before going to sleep that night, I felt I was in a different bed in my home as a married woman and not as a single working girl sharing an apartment with 3 other girls. I twisted an imaginary wedding band on my imaginary left hand, saying over and over to myself, "This is wonderful. This is wonderful. This is wonderful. I really am Mrs. J.E." And I fell asleep in what was a moment before a waking dream. I repeated this imaginary scene for 1 month, night after night. The first week in October, he found me. On our second date, I knew my dreams were rightly placed. Your teaching tells us to live in the end of our desire until the desire becomes fact. So although I did not know how he felt toward me, I continued night after night living in the feeling of my dream realized. The results? In November, he proposed. In January, he announced our engagement. And the following May, we were married. The loveliest part of it all, however, is that I am happier than I ever dreamed possible, and I know in my heart he is too. By using your and her imagination radically, instead of conservatively, by building, she basically built her world out of pure dreams of fancy. I love that term by Neville. Build your dreams of fancy rather than using images supplied by memory. She brought about the fulfillment of her dream. Common sense would have used images supplied by her memory and thereby perpetuated the fact of lack in her life. Are you doing that? Put that in the comments section. Is there a dream that you have had and you are using it in a conservative way? You're drawing from your past. And then put in the comments section, what would be, moving from the conservative to the creative imagination that you could put in your dream. Yeah, would love to see those, love to hold that energy with you. All right, imagination created what she desired out of a dream of fancy. Everyone must live wholly on the level of imagination, and it must be consciously and deliberately undertaken. So just summarizing that up, that you and I want to build from pure dreams of fancy. We don't want to build dreams from common sense and past memories, because that is actually going to create for us a reoccurrence. We're just going to have the same thing happening with us over and over again. There's a quote here that Neville has, and he says, "Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reasons over comprehends." If our time of revision be well spent, we need not worry about results. Our fondest hopes will be realized. Art thou real, earth? Am I? In whose dream do we exist? There is no inevitable permanence in anything. Both past and present continue to exist only because they are sustained by imagining on some level or another, and a radical transformation of life is always possible by man, you and I, revising the undesirable part of it. I love that. In another letter that Neville has in here by Mr. R.S., this questions the subject of influence. So here's this letter. During your current series of lectures, trouble developed with collections on one of my trust deeds. The security, a house and lot, was neglected and run down. The owners were apparently spending their money in bars while their 2 little girls, aged 9 and 11, were noticeably uncared for. However, forgetting appearances, I began to revise the situation. In my imagination, I drove my wife past the property and said to her, now this is where this man is using the four mighty ones. He becomes the producer, the director, the author, and the actor. And so he is imagining, this is what he's seeing as he's driving by with his car in this property. So this is what this man has written imaginatively. He says to his wife, "Isn't the yard beautiful? It's so neat and well cared for. Those people really show their love for their home. This is one trust deed we will never have to worry about. I would see the house and lot as I wanted to see it, a place so lovely. It gave me a warm glow of pleasure. Every time the thought of this property came to me, I repeated my imaginal scene." Now notice he repeated it every time he thought of seeing the property in its state of disarray. At the level of fact, that property was in a state of not good, and those little girls were not being taken care of. And so every time that came to his mind, instead of shifting into even complaining or even thinking of moving in some way from a physical aspect of what you could do for those girls, or knocking on the door and telling these people to, clean up their act and clean up their yard. He didn't do that. What he did is he repeated his imaginal scene over and over again. Are you ready? This gets better. Here we go. After I had been practicing this revision for some time, the woman lived in the house had an automobile accident. While she was in the hospital, her husband disappeared. The children were cared for by the neighbors, and I was tempted to visit the mother in the hospital to reassure her of assistance if necessary. But how could I? When my imaginary scene implied that she and her family were happy, successful, and obviously contented. This is where this man is really trusting in this incredible law of the universe, of trusting in this incredible power that is breathing him, and really, it's just amazing. This story gets better. So guess what? He says, I did nothing but my daily revision. A short while after leaving the hospital, the woman and her 2 daughters disappeared also. Payments were sent on the property, and a few months later, she reappeared with a wedding certificate and a new husband. At this writing, all payments are right up to date. The 2 little girls are obviously happy and well cared for, and a room has been added to the property by the owners, giving our trustee additional security. It was a mighty nice to solve my problem without threats, unkind words, eviction, or worry about the little girls. But was there something in my imagining that sent the woman to the hospital? He was a little concerned about this. He goes on to say, any imaginal activity acquiring intensity through our concentrated attention to clarity of the end desired tends to overflow into regions beyond where we are. But we must leave it to take care of such imaginal activity itself. It is marvelously resourceful in adapting and adjusting means to realize itself. Once we think in terms of influence rather than clarity of the end desired, the effort of imagination becomes an effort of will, and the great art of imaging is perverted into tyranny. So he's basically saying that really what we want to come from is the clarity of the desire at the end and from the end, rather than trying to influence. And he talks about that, this is so cool, because I didn't solve the problem by threatening or having unkind words or eviction or even worry. Rather, he just kept practicing this imaginal activity. So even in the comment section, what has been something that you have imagined? Because all of us have already done this. Sometimes we just forget to use it. What have you imagined in your life and rehearsed over and over and over again? And it began to show up in a whole incredible way, and it was completely solved. And you didn't have to get in there and force things to happen. Back to the reading. The buried past usually lies deeper than our surface mind can plumb. But fortunately for this lady, she remembered and proved that the made past can also be unmade through revision. So one of the things that I want to just share here in my own life, as I completed a 25-year marriage about, it's been 5-6 years ago now. One of the things that I experienced is both my daughters decided to just have a relationship with their father. And so here's my, 17-year-old daughter and about a 21-year-old daughter. And I had been, a stay-at-home mom that worked part-time and was just, I love my kids. I just love them. They're so amazing, even to this day. And as you can just pause, if you're a mom or a parent, dad, of imagining your kids all of a sudden not talking to you. You don't get to see them. You don't get to be part of their life. And that went on for 2 years after my divorce. And I was told by my older daughter that she was actually living in Italy at the time, that she just didn't want to hear from me. And she did a great job of expressing herself in this text message. And so I was like, you know what? I get to honor her request. This is where she is at. This is where my younger daughter is at. And as I was learning about feeling is the secret from Neville Goddard and my superpower of imagination, guess what I did? I wrote a story. I became the producer, the director, and the author, and the actor of my vision of my girls. Now, you get a little choked up about this. Oh gosh, I love them so much. So what I began to do was I wrote a letter, and I read it over and over again of all the imaginal things that I was doing with my adult daughters, to out on the boat water skiing, that we were going to plays in Seattle. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I love to be out on the water. And I just kept imagining these. And I also shared them with people, really good friends of mine, that would hold that with me, that they would hold that, like that script in their hand and like, I believe in this. We're going to almost like, yeah, we're going to make this movie, Beth. We're going to do this. And so one of the ways that I use my imagination to be close with my daughters is I would stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon with them. And this is just a fun imaginal activity that I did with myself to bring joy and fun. And my daughters and I would be standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and yeah, it's way down there. And we would leave our bodies and be just become this light spirit, that we would go and fly through the Grand Canyon, and we would just do all kinds of flips and turns through the Grand Canyon, along the walls and down along the river. If you think about a paraglider that is just gliding through the canyon walls, and you come down next to the water, and your foot is just barely above the water, so you're making a ripple in the water, and we would just laugh and giggle and have so much fun together, just in spirit. And I would do this over and over and over for like 2 years, you guys. And you know what? My dream came true. And there was a day that we all got to, be together in Arizona. My younger daughter and I flew down to meet my older daughter, and we all met in the airport in Arizona, and it was one of the best days of my life. And I did come from the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And I also, yes, I'm standing there with my arms around my daughters, and we're laughing and giggling and crying and so excited to be with each other. And here's the thing is, I used my imaginal creative activity to come from an enlarging future. I didn't come from the conservative past at all. And I got to experience in that moment that I could create the circumstances and conditions that I would love in life. And so firsthand, I test this. Take a situation, a circumstance and condition, and come from the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and create your own script and be the director and producer and actor and author of all of that. And put it down in the comments. What would you love to produce and direct and write and act in your life? This is where it begins, in that imaginal activity. So, woohoo! Gosh, amazing. It just fills me with energy right now of remembering and recalling. We are more powerful than our current circumstances, situations. That is already manifested, you guys. We don't want to live from what is already manifested. We want to enlarge our future. All right, you guys ready for the next story here? This one is about health, and it is about, Neville's going to tell us about a man that actually had weak back pain for 39 years, close to 40 years. So here we go on this next story. For 39 years, I had suffered from a weak back. The pain would increase and decrease, but would never leave completely. The condition had progressed to the point where I had used medical treatment almost constantly. The doctor would put the hip right for the moment, but the pain simply would not go away. One night I heard you speak, Neville, of revision, and wondered to myself, if a condition of almost 40 years could be revised, could it? I had remembered that at the age of 3 or 4 years, I had fallen backward from a very high swing, and I had been quite ill at the time because of a serious hip injury. From that time on, I had never been completely free of pain, and had paid many a dollar to alleviate the condition, to no avail. This year, during the month of August, the pain had become so intense, and one night I decided to test myself and attempt to revise that ancient accident which had been the cause of so much distress in pain and costly medical fees most of my adult life. Many nights passed before I could feel myself back to the age of childhood. But I succeeded. One night, I actually felt myself on the swing, feeling the rush of the wind as the swing rose higher and higher. As the swing slowed down, I jumped forward, landing solidly and easily on my feet. In the imaginal action, I ran to my mother and insisted that she come watch what I could do. I did it again, jumping down from the swing and landing safely on my 2 feet. I repeated this imaginal act over and over until I fell asleep in the doing of it. Within 2 days, the pain in my back and hip began to recede, and within 2 months, pain no longer existed for me. a condition that had plagued me for more than 39 years, that had cost a small fortune in attempted cure, was no more. Woohoo! Wow! So Neville's going to introduce to us the pruning shears of revision. And I have a short little story about myself and my ankle sprain, as I mentioned. So one day I'm walking out from my house to the garage and I just misstepped and I sprained my left ankle. Now, a little bit about me. I'm a board certified athletic trainer licensed by the state. I've worked in sports medicine for over 40 years, all around the world, with all kinds of levels of athletes, from junior high all the way to Olympic level. And I know when I sprained my ankle. I've seen thousands of them. Well, I laid down on the floor and I was in pain. I was breathing and I thought of the art of revision. And I just laid down. I sent breath to my ankle. I slowed my breathing down and I began to revise my step from my house into the garage. And then I landed solidly. And I was laying on my back, doing this art of revision over and over and over again. And no one was around. It was just me. And just imagine me, I'm laying on my back. I've got both my arms, and my hands up around my left ankle. And I'm breathing like crazy. I'm just like, slow it down, start going in and out through my nose, close my eyes. And once I became really calm, I kept practicing that solid step into the garage. And pretty soon, really within moments, there was no more pain in my ankle. And I also am aware of that, if you're aware of chakras, that we have energy chakras in our hands. So that's going on too. I got both my hands on my ankle. And within 10 minutes, my ankle was perfectly fine. And in fact, I went for a jog that same day. And so this was another just short testimony that I have actually tested this art of revision and have experienced just extraordinary success. And there's been on the other side of this coin too, you guys, where I have done arts of revision and it didn't manifest, but I don't give up on it. I just keep experimenting and keep doing and really have fun with it. I think that's one of the things when I mentioned about my daughters and I and just having imaginal fun in the Grand Canyon. And I want to come back to that story because it was, actually my oldest daughter and I actually went to the Grand Canyon and we walked along the edge of the Grand Canyon. And I felt like, oh my gosh, this is just like the vision I had. And obviously we didn't jump our bodies off of there, but it was just an incredible moment to be with my oldest daughter in the Grand Canyon and in just experiencing that view and how it related to my vision. So what would you like to revise? Put it down in the comments. All right, you ready for pruning shears of revision? Here we go. We got a little bit more to go here in the chapter. So Neville writes that it is to the pruning shears of revision that we owe our prime fruit. Man and his past are continuous structure. This structure contains all of the past, which has been conserved and still operates below the threshold of his senses, your senses, to influence the present and the future of his life. The whole is carrying all its contents with it. Any alteration of content will result in an alteration in the present and the future. The first act of correction or cure is always revise. The first act of correction and cure is always revise. One of the fun things that I did when my daughters were young is, they're learning their own motor control and stuff like that. So at times we would be having lunch or dinner or something like that, and they would accidentally spill their drink, whether it was, whatever they were drinking. And, the little kids, they look at you with these big eyes and they're like, oh no. And I came up with this really fun thing as a parent from when I played volleyball. So when they want to do a replay in volleyball, the umpire, when I was playing, they would do 2 thumbs up, which meant let's do a replay. And so that's what I explained to my kiddos, that anytime they spilled something or it just didn't go quite as right, is I was already practicing this art of revision in my parenting. And I would just, with a big smile, I would put 2 thumbs up to my daughters, Maddie and Ellie. And I'm like, hey, let's do a replay. And it just took all the stress away for them. And whatever was spilled, I would say to them, hey, it just means that area is going to get a nice, good clean right now. And so there was no guilt. There was no shame. It was, they were learning how to live in their little human bodies. And so feel free to give yourself 2 thumbs up and give yourself a replay and the art of revision. So if the past can be recreated into present, so can the revised past. And thus the revised past appears within the very heart of the present life. Not fate, but a revised past wrought her good fortune. Make results and accomplishment the crucial test of your true imagination, and your confidence in the power of imagination to create reality will grow gradually from your experiments with revision confronted by experience. So only by this process of experiment can you realize the potential power of your awakened and controlled imagination. And I'm just going to read that again. Only by the process of you and I experimenting can we realize the potential power of our awakened and controlled imagination. So Neville writes, how much do you owe my master? He said. And he says 100 measures of oil. So Neville's stating a parable here. And he said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. This parable of the unjust steward urges us to mentally falsify the facts of life, to alter a theme already in being. By means of such imaginative falsehoods, a man acquires friends. As each day falls, mentally revise the facts of life and make them conform to events well worthy of recall. Tomorrow, we'll take up the altered pattern and go forward until at length it is realized on the heights of attainment. The reader will find it worthwhile to follow these clues. Imaginal construction of scenes implying the wish fulfilled, and imaginative participation in these scenes until tones of reality are reached. We are dealing with the secret of imagining, in which man is seen awakening into a world completely subject to his imaginative power. Man can understand reoccurrence of events well enough, the building of a world from images supplied by memory. Things remain as they are. This gives him a sense of security and stability of things. However, the presence within him of a power which awakens and becomes what it wills radically changes its form, its environment, and the circumstances of life, inspires him a feeling of insecurity, a dreadful fear of the future. Now, it is high time to awake out of sleep and put an end to all the unlovely creations of sleeping man. Revise each day. Let your strong imagination turn the great wheel backward until Troy unburn. So he finishes this chapter with that quote from H.G. Wells again. So, summarizing here and turning the wheel backwards in chapter 3 of The Law and the Promise by Neville Goddard, he leaves us with this. Really, if we continue to create from our past memories, we really are staying in a state of security and stagnance. And if we will allow ourselves to use this controlled imagination and awaken to this power, we can actually participate from our desires fulfilled, and we can begin to create the conditions and circumstances that we would love to experience. So thank you for joining me for chapter 3, The Law and the Promise by Neville Goddard. I hope that this has served you and awakened you to your superpower of imagination. Go out there and experiment with your experience of life. This is Life in Full Expression with Beth Wolf, Platinum Life University, where I really truly believe that everybody has their unique alchemy, their extraordinary artistry, and their adventures of life. Until next time, I'll see you then.